morning, we would like to welcome the Iowa Beef Industry Council and Kelsey Byrnes, who some of you may know her with her blog, Dance Around the Kitchen, is going to be demonstrating several beef recipes, and there will be samples. So we would also like to thank our sponsors who helped put this beautiful kitchen together a year ago. The sponsors are Warner Stellan, Royal Prestige, Cambria, and Rada Cutlery, and then the Fairway Meat and Grocery. All of those businesses helped make this kitchen possible. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the beef folks, and we hope you enjoyed the demonstration.
All right, can you guys all hear me okay? All right, like she had mentioned, my name is Kelsey Byrnes, and I have a blog called dancearoundthekitchen.com. I am happy to be here presenting with Iowa Beef today, and today we're going to talk about 3 super easy recipes that are all done on a sheet pan. So we're thinking a few dishes, super easy recipes, get it into the oven quick, and it's done pretty quick as well. So there's really 3 reasons that I love this topic. First reason being, I grew up on a farm. Though it was a pig, corn, and soybean farm, I now live on my husband's family farm operation, and we live just down the road from my Uncle Bob's cows, and I see how hard cattle farmers work to take good care of their livestock. So that's the number 1 reason. I really love supporting Iowa's farmers, whether it's pork, beef, turkey, egg, etc. Also, I have a very busy family. We live on a farm, so my husband and I both work our full-time jobs, and then he works on the farm on the side. We also have a 1, 3, and a 5-year-old, so they keep us on our toes all the time. So when it comes to easy meals, sheet pans are like perfect. And then the third thing is also relates back to the kids, and that is because beef is very, very good for kids of all ages, especially infants and then teens and adolescents. So infants, a lot of babies tend to be deficient in several different vitamins and minerals that are vital for their brain development. So when it comes to feeding babies, I find it so important to make sure that there's beef in their systems. So today we're going to start with the first recipe, which is meatloaf and potatoes. So these are all going to be done on 1 sheet pan. We're only using 1 pan in the oven, so it's super simple. But before we get started, I want to introduce Rochelle Gilman. She is with Iowa Beef Industry Council, and she is their dietitian.
Good morning, and thank you for being here. I'm going to be doing some trivia sprinkled out throughout Kelsey's demonstration, and we have a few little prizes for you. So do you want me to start with the first trivia?
Go for it.
This one's a fun one. Does anyone know Kelsey's famed claim from being on the Food Network? I saw back there.
It was budget meals? Something with budget meals.
Yes.
Close. Yep, it's Big Bad Budget
Yes.
Battle. Yep, it just aired last September was the first time that was aired. So they do reruns on occasion. So if you ever catch it on there, it's episode 6.
And that was with the Pioneer Woman, and she actually won that. So I was so proud of her. She's an Iowa State grad, and I was just so proud of her that she actually won that competition. So we love having her represent us and fix some fantastic beef recipes for you. So, okay, I'll get your prize, and Kelsey can go ahead and start with the meatloaf sheet pan.
Perfect. So yes, that was a very, very wild experience, one I never thought I would have, but when I was asked if I wanted to be a part of it, I was super excited to do so, and I was even more shocked that I won. So, moving on, we're going to get back to the sheet pan meatloaf. So we are going to start with the potatoes. The meatloaf and the potatoes are all going to cook in 1, so they're all going to cook in about an hour total. So what I have here is some cubed red potatoes, and of course, being with the Beef Council, especially with Rochelle, nutrition is always really, really important. So we're going to keep these as healthy as possible. What we're gonna do is we're just gonna, and it's super easy, we just spray them with a little bit of cooking oil. And then I have some salt and pepper here. We're gonna go ahead and put on the potatoes. Sometimes I find it even easiest to put these all in like a large Ziploc baggie if you really want to be low on dishes. And then we're going to take it, and this is a smaller sheet pan than I would typically use, but we're also going to save a little bit of space here on the counter. We're going to go ahead and just lay them all out on the sheet pan. Now we also want to save some space for the meatloaf, so we're going to just spread it out a little bit. All right, so now we're gonna make the meatloaf mixture. So this is 1.5 pounds, and this is lean ground beef, so this is 93% lean. So we're gonna take that, we're gonna take an 8-ounce can of tomato sauce, and we're gonna use most of it inside of the meatloaf, and the rest is gonna be part of the topping. So we'll save that other part of the can. Then I have 1 onion that's diced, and 1 cup of breadcrumbs. Have an egg, and then this is a Worcestershire sauce, and then salt and pepper. So all we're gonna do, just like any other meatloaf, you're gonna go ahead, and I find it easiest to use your hands, especially with the lean ground beef. I find it easiest. It seems to be a little more tight, I guess. So if I mix it with my hands, it's a lot easier. So we're gonna go ahead and mix all this up. And one thing Rochelle and I were talking about when it comes to meatloaf is that you can use lots of different things other than breadcrumbs. I know she mentioned that she always uses oatmeal. That's another great option. That's a whole grain option that you can use. My family always used saltine crackers growing up, and my husband's family uses cornflakes. So there are lots of different options for what to use instead of breadcrumbs if you choose. All right, so once that all comes together, I'm gonna call that good enough. We're gonna go ahead and put that on the sheet pan. And you just wanna kind of shape it. For this recipe, it says 8-inch by 4-inch. And that is gonna make it the right thickness, so everything's gonna cook at about the same, in about the same amount of time. All right, so what's gonna happen next? This is gonna go in the oven for 40 minutes. Once that 40-minute timer goes off, you're gonna put the sauce on top. So all the sauces, and I already went ahead and mixed it up. This is just tomato sauce, ground mustard, and then garlic salt. So that's just gonna get mixed, and it's gonna get tossed on, and it's gonna cook a little bit longer, and then everything will be ready. If your meatloaf is done before the potatoes, you can certainly take that off the pan and put the potatoes back in the oven for a little bit until they're nice and tender on the inside. These I cut up, they should be about this size. They're about maybe 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch. They're gonna cook in just about the same amount of time as that meatloaf should. So I've always had it done right around the same time. So we are gonna go ahead and pass out samples of this. Does anybody have any questions while they start passing these out? Yeah?
Did you use dried breadcrumbs or fresh?
These were dried breadcrumbs. Yep, so this just came in a little canister from the grocery store, but you could certainly make your own as well. Any other questions? Yeah?
Did you substitute oatmeal or you did it 1-for-1 like breadcrumbs?
Yeah, that would be fine for this. Yep. Yeah.
Did you oil the pan or put anything down?
I did not, and that's a great question. I use parchment paper. It's gonna make it for an easier cleanup, and I've never had anything stick on parchment paper either. So you can use parchment. You could also use aluminum foil. If you do that, I would recommend spraying it. I find that maybe sticks a little bit more than parchment. If you don't use anything on it at all, I would go ahead and spray it so it doesn't stick to your pan. Any other questions? All right, was that easy? Super easy. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and move this while they pass out the samples, and we're gonna get ready for the next recipe. Rochelle, I know you're busy, but do you have any quiz questions for us?
Well, lots of great beef recipes are found on beefitswhatsfordinner.com. We actually have a culinary test kitchen out in Denver that develops all these beef recipes. So my question is, any guesses on what is the #1 searched recipe on beefitswhatsfordinner.com? What would be the #1 searched beef recipe on beefitswhatsfordinner.com? Who said meatloaf? Yes, meatloaf. And it has been that way for how many years, Kylie? I mean, I think the pandemic really got people, cooking that comfort food and interested. And so, yeah, meatloaf is the #1 searched recipe. So we love sharing this recipe because it's so easy. One pan, easy cleanup. So we wanted to share that with you.
Does that surprise you that meatloaf is #1? That always surprised me. Although that's probably one of the beef meals that I make most often at home. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and get started on the next recipe. I know you guys are still getting your samples. They will be coming around, but we're gonna go ahead and start the next one so we have plenty of time to get everything made. All right, so the next recipe we're gonna make is definitely a different flavor. We're gonna do an Asian beef and broccoli. So we kind of did a comfort food first, we're gonna do Asian, and then last we're gonna do like a Mexican, little Tex-Mex situation. So we're gonna start with the beef and broccoli, and to do so, I'm going to make the beef marinade in a bag, simply because I find that it's super easy to clean up, and I really like that. So to start, we're gonna use, this is low sodium soy sauce, so we're gonna go ahead and just toss that in the bag. I use low sodium, especially in this, because you want the flavor of the soy sauce, but soy sauce can be very salty. So we're gonna use the low sodium version. And then we're gonna use rice wine vinegar. That you can find by the vinegar or sometimes by like the Asian food section in the grocery store. And then we're gonna add sesame oil. So sesame oil you can find again kind of in that Asian area of the grocery store. And then we have minced garlic and minced ginger. So I find it easiest to use these containers. You can find them in the refrigerated section at the grocery store, simply because I don't have the time to chop up a garlic clove every single time I need it. So I usually use these little bottles and they squeeze right out. So we're gonna use a tablespoon of garlic and a tablespoon of ginger. And that's gonna help give us a lot of that Asian flavor as well. All right, so once we have those done, we're gonna add some sweetness to the mixture. So I have some brown sugar, and then I also have honey. You could use just one or the other. I kind of like doing half and half because I like the flavor of the honey, but I don't want it to be super overpowering for the dish. All right, and lastly, we're gonna add some cornstarch. And the cornstarch is just gonna help thicken that sauce up a little bit. It should kind of, you don't want it to be super liquidy, and you also don't want it to be super thick and goopy. So this is gonna help just give it a little bit of body so it's not super runny or thick. All right, so I will go ahead and shut that, and I'm just gonna kind of shake it up. You just wanna make sure that all that cornstarch is mixed in well so you don't have any clumps once it bakes. All right, so now that that's done, we're gonna go ahead and add the steak. So this is a sirloin steak that I cut into like 1/4-inch thick pieces. Rochelle, what are some other cuts of steak that you could use as well for this beef and broccoli? Like flank steak? This is sirloin. Yep. Okay, sirloin is really good because it's gonna stay nice and tender. This cooks really, really quick in the oven, so if you have a nice tender steak and you cook it just until it's done, it's gonna be nice and juicy. So we're gonna go ahead and add that to the marinade. And another thing I really like about this recipe, as well as the next recipe we're gonna do, is that you can make it ahead of time. So these recipes you can whip up in the morning, go to work, and then later put it on your sheet pan and bake it. So what I did actually just this morning for the one that you're gonna taste, before I started driving, I went ahead and just toss the meat into the marinade, and let it marinate on my drive here. So that's super easy. I have that ready. I'm gonna grab a sheet pan. And like I said, these sheet pans are a little smaller than what I would typically use. And you also want one that has the edge around the outside so your sauce doesn't run everywhere. I'm just gonna use a slotted spoon here, and we're gonna scoop the meat onto the pan.
Which county in the state of Iowa has the most cattle? Raise your hand and let me know. Tell me. No? 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 Sioux. Northwest Iowa. They got a lot of, yeah. #1 county that has the most cattle.
All right, so I have the beef on the sheet pan. Next, so that, like I said, that's gonna marinate for a little bit. You can do it for an hour, you can do it, I don't recommend doing it for longer than 4 hours. If you marinate it for longer than 4 hours, sometimes the meat can be a little over tender, and it's gonna get a little bit mushy. So 1 to 4 hours is probably your best bet. Next, I'm gonna take the broccoli. So these are just broccoli florets. You can buy it just like this, or you can buy a whole broccoli and cut the tops off. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and add them to the bag as well. And we just wanna cover them in sauce. I still have a little bit of meat in here, but that's okay. We're just gonna cover them a little bit, and then we're gonna scoop them out just like we did the beef. We don't need all the sauce to be on the pan, so we are just gonna kind of scoop them out onto the sheet pan. And you wanna spread all of the meat and broccoli out as much as you can, just to let it all cook about. Give them some space to cook. Now, you're gonna notice after you take the broccoli out that you're gonna have some sauce left in the bag. Now, you don't need to use it, but if you want to, if I'm gonna serve something like beef and broccoli over rice, I wanna have a little extra sauce, just so the rice gets nice and flavorful. And what you can do is you can toss that in a saucepan, the extra sauce, and heat it just until it's at a slow boil. Take it off the pan, take it off the stove top, and then you can serve it like that with your beef and broccoli. All right, so like I said, the sheet pan's a little bit small. I'm gonna go ahead and toss this into the oven just in case we don't have enough for samples. And this one especially cooks very quick. This is like 12 minutes in the oven. So I'm gonna go ahead and put that in. All right, so they're gonna go ahead and pass that one out. Like I mentioned, how I like to serve it is on rice. You can use, this is just regular white rice. You can use brown rice, cauliflower rice, whatever you prefer. And then I like to sprinkle a little bit of green onions and sesame seeds on top. Totally optional, but I think it makes it look a little more pretty, and it also kind of freshens it up with some bright, fresh flavors. Rochelle, what's our next trivia question?
Okay, beef has a lot of lean cuts that meet its USDA criteria that says that it is a lean cut of beef. How many cuts does beef have that are considered lean? What? Who said over here? 3? More than 3. More than 18. We're playing high and low, aren't we? Yeah. More than 28. Close.
38.
38. Okay, who said 38? Well, she was pretty close because she said 36. Yeah, 38 cuts of lean, which surprises a lot of people. A really good clue when you're choosing beef is to look for the keywords round or loin. Then you know you're getting a lean cut. You know, the cattle farmers listen to consumers. They want a leaner product, so they've really improved breeding, feeding, making it a leaner product. Our processors, retailers are doing a great job of trimming the excess fat. So, you know, we've got a lot of great tasting lean products, and guess what? They're some of our favorite cuts. This is one of them. Sirloin steak is one of them. Top sirloin, tenderloin. Strip steaks, that's, you know, it's not in the name, but the strip steak is the larger muscle in the T-bone. You know, that's very lean. So there's lots of lean cuts, even lean ground beef, 90, 93% lean ground beef. So there's lots of options that are lean and have those 10 essential nutrients, protein, zinc, iron, lots of B vitamins, selenium. So we're very proud of the fact that our Iowa beef farmers are producing leaner products, and it has a great taste that people enjoy. All right, 38, okay.
Yeah, any other questions before we move on? Go ahead. No, they should be okay. That one especially cooks super quick. It cooks in like 12 minutes. So you should be fine with the red pepper flakes in there as well. Yeah. You could also sprinkle, if you wanted to skip it when you bake it, you could certainly sprinkle some on top after it's done. Especially if you have young kids or something that don't want the heat, you can just add it to your individual bowl. Any other questions?
You substitute like carrots or a thicker vegetable with
You could. You want to make sure that they're fairly thinly cut, just because this cooks so quickly. Like a potato, for example, would not be done in a time. It's going to be kind of crunchy. But if you do a really thinly sliced carrot or something like that, that should be fine. Yeah, good questions. You really don't need to. You certainly can, but you definitely don't need to. And what I did for you guys today, so I had finished them right before you guys had come in, and I went ahead and put them in a crock pot. So you should get about the same experience, but do note that they've been in the crock pot for a little bit, just keeping hot in there. So any other questions? Do we have any beef farmers in here today? Very good. Cool, I see some familiar faces, so that's fun. All right, so the next recipe we're gonna try is sheet pan steak fajitas. I really, really love this recipe because, well, for several reasons, but one reason is because it's an easy way for me to get my kids to eat vegetables. Growing up, my brother absolutely hated onions and peppers. And my kids probably would too if they could see them. But I go ahead and make their little fajitas before they take a bite, and then I just sneak them in there and roll them up and have it on their plates, and they would not know any different. My daughter, actually, I made these a couple nights ago, and my daughter, she took a bite and she goes, "Oh, Mom, you put a pepper in there." And I said, "You need to try it like that, and if you don't like it, then you can take the pepper out." And she took a bite and she said, "Wow, it's actually really good." So it's a nice way to incorporate vegetables into your kids' diets as well. And like I mentioned earlier with young kids and beef, this is one that especially when my youngest I probably started him at right about 6 months old. Beef was probably the first or second thing that I had given him. So what I do is I take the cooked beef and I puree it in a food processor, and it works really, really well. He loved it, and so then I started even, like for this dish, I would just mix the meat and the peppers and onions all together. So the earlier they are introduced to these unique flavors and different flavors, the less picky they're going to be when they grow up. So I always highly recommend that to new parents. All right, so moving on to the sheet pan fajitas, we're going to start with a half a cup of olive oil. You can also use whatever other oil you have at home. I know a lot of people like to cook with like avocado oil. You could certainly just use your regular vegetable oil as well. All right, and then I have 2 tablespoons of lime juice. I really like using fresh lime. I find that it has a lot better flavor than the bottled stuff, but if that's all you have, you can certainly use that as well. We're gonna add, so now we're gonna add lots of different spices that are gonna give that fajita flavor. So we're gonna start with salt. We're gonna use 1.5 teaspoons of salt. And then we're gonna add cumin. So we're gonna add 2 teaspoons of cumin. What's that? That's a good question. Cumin is it reminds me of like taco seasoning has a lot of cumin in it. So it definitely has more of that Mexican flair. All right, so we have the 2 teaspoons of cumin, and then we're gonna add 2 teaspoons of chili powder. I use mild chili powder. You can also get hot chili powder. Like I mentioned, I'm usually cooking for kids, so I don't wanna scare them off with too much heat. So I use the mild chili powder. And then we're gonna add some garlic powder. Just doing 1 teaspoon of this, and 1 teaspoon of onion powder. And then we have 1/2 teaspoon of oregano. Perfect. And I always thought of oregano as more of an Italian spice, but it goes really, really well in Mexican flavors too. All right, so just like with the beef and broccoli, I'm gonna go ahead and mix this up. This one comes together super, super easily. And again, with this marinade, you're gonna wanna keep it in for maybe a half hour to a couple hours. I wouldn't overdo it, or like I said earlier, it could get a little bit mushy. So these, I actually use sirloin again for this recipe. You could also use flank steak. Rochelle, any other cuts that you would recommend for fajitas? Skirt, yep, that's a good one. Yep, and of course, you want to try to cut the pieces as evenly as possible, so you don't have some pieces that are really done and other pieces that are still raw. So do your best to cut them, and you want to cut against the grain, so that way they're going to be nice and tender once they're cooked. All right, so we're going to go ahead and mix this one up. Obviously today we are not going to have the time to let it marinate for too long, but that's still going to give us a lot of flavor. Sometimes for this recipe, what I'll do is I'll have the marinade ready in a bag, and then I'll have the meat cut up and ready in another bag. So right when we get home from daycare, we can put them together, and then in a half hour or an hour, you can toss them in the oven. Or these we also like to cook on the Blackstone. So that's another really easy option if you have a flat top grill to do that as well. All right, and I'm gonna go ahead and add the onions and peppers in here to get some of that flavor. Here I have 1 onion, and you wanna slice it pretty thin, just because, again, this recipe cooks really quick. So if you don't slice it thin, you're gonna have super crunchy onions. Which again, my brother would really not like. You can hide them in fajitas if you cut them thin. I also have 1/2 of a pepper of each of the following peppers. For this one, actually, I have an orange, a red, and a green. For some reason, the grocery stores didn't have yellow peppers, but use whatever you have on hand. You can use all red, all green, whatever your preference is. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and toss that in there, hopefully without spilling. And again, that's another thing you can do ahead of time is get those peppers and onions prepped. All right, so we want to make sure we get that marinade on all of the meat and the vegetables. All right, and just like with the beef and broccoli as well, you're going to want to make sure this has plenty of space on the sheet pan. So you could divide it between 2 pans if you want to. It might just take a little bit more time in the oven if you don't have quite enough room. So I'm just gonna put about 1/2 of it on this so we don't get them overly crowded. And then we can spread it out. And one of my favorite kitchen tools, and I know Rochelle would probably say the same thing, is an instant read thermometer. I use these for pretty much everything. I use them a lot when I'm cooking meat. I actually use them a lot when I bake as well. It's a very easy way to tell if a cinnamon roll is done or anything that you have in the oven. All right, here's some more beef and broccoli if we need that. Did everyone get a sample of the beef and broccoli? Yeah? All right, perfect. That oven is off. All right, so back to thermometers. That's an easy way to tell if the fajitas are done. You can cook the steak to your liking, especially with the kids. They like to have it medium well typically, so that's usually what we do here for these. But any other questions with the fajitas?
Have you used that recipe with chicken?
I have not tried it with chicken. Nope, I've only used it with beef. But of course, if you're going to use chicken, you want to make sure you cook that fully to 165. What other questions are there? Yeah.
Could you use frozen vegetables?
Yes, and they might take a little bit. They will take longer in the oven just because you're starting them from frozen. If you have time to thaw it out, I'd probably recommend thawing it out and then just putting it in a strainer so any of the extra moisture from the freezer can be drained. But yeah, that should be fine. Yeah?
Did you say you could do that on Blackstone also?
Yes. Yeah, so what I do is, so this mixture that I have in here, we will heat up the Blackstone and just toss it all on there. It also is super quick, so if you have a Blackstone, I do recommend that. One thing with the fajitas that I really like to do if you have the headspace, if you're ready for supper and you have a couple extra minutes, turn on the broiler for just a minute or two, and it's going to get kind of the top pieces a little bit crispy to give a little bit more texture for the fajitas. Now, most of the time, my kids are begging for supper and I don't have time to broil it, and that's fine. But if you do have that time, go ahead and toss on the broiler. I think that it adds a little bit of texture without overcooking the meat. And I was also going to share, so when I serve fajitas, we serve it a couple different ways. Just a couple nights ago when we had it, I served it on a rice. So I had rice with the steak and the vegetables. My kids, of course, love it in a tortilla. So we usually serve them up on tortillas. You can use regular whole wheat. You can use corn tortillas if you prefer. But I wanted to show you how I typically serve any tacos, fajitas, etc. There tend to be a lot of toppings. And what I find easiest is to put the toppings in like a 6-cup muffin tin. And it's easy to pass around the table so everyone can kind of customize their taco or fajita as they like. So for this recipe, we have, I put some guacamole. Oops. Sorry about that. Losing my speaker. I put some guacamole. I did fresh lime slices. I always like to squeeze some fresh lime over the fajitas. I also really like queso fresco cheese. It's kind of a crumbly cheese that you see in a lot of Mexican restaurants. Sour cream, you can use cheddar cheese, and then I had a few tomatoes fresh from the garden that you can toss on there as well. So fajitas are super versatile. Like I said, with how you cook it, you can do it on the stovetop, in the oven, on a Blackstone, etc. And then also in how you serve it, whether you serve it on rice, you serve it in tortilla, etc. What questions do you have about the fajitas? Any questions about beef in general? Does anybody make any other beef recipes, like sheet pan meals? Another one that we like to do is do like burgers and fries. So if you cut some potatoes super thin and toss them with some vegetable oil and some salt and pepper, and then you make your patties on the other side, you can cook your burgers and your fries all at the same time. That's another fun one. The grease, I typically watch it. If it's starting to kind of run over, I'll do one of two things. One thing I like to do is I'll put some aluminum foil on one side of the pan and kind of make a little barrier so it's like in its own little pan, and then the fries on the other side, just to make sure that none of the juices flow over there. Or if it's a really lean ground beef, you probably won't have an issue. You can kind of blot it with paper towels if you notice it start to do that. But yeah, and then I usually you can put some cheese on it in the last few minutes of baking as well. Any other questions? My favorite beef recipe? Who asked that? Oh, there you are. Hello. Oh gosh, I have lots of favorites. I will say one of my very favorites that we demoed a couple of years ago at the fair was Philly cheesesteak sloppy joes. That recipe is on my website, and that's one of my go-tos. It has peppers and onions, of course the ground beef, and then at the very end it mixes with some provolone cheese, so it's kind of a cheesy sloppy joe. It's super flavorful, and my kids like it, and it has peppers in it, so that's a bonus. What other questions do you have? My website is dancearoundthekitchen.com. You can find that on about any social platform as well. I'm pretty active on Instagram as well as Pinterest. So if you're a fan of Pinterest or Instagram, you can find my content there. You can also find me on Facebook, YouTube, TikTok. That's about it. You know, there's so many social platforms these days.
I got a couple other questions for them.
Yeah, go for it.
What is the leanest cut of beef? I mean, yes, who said that? All right. Does anyone know what the second leanest cut of beef is? It's a relatively new cut. Has anyone heard of the flat iron steak? That's actually the second leanest cut. Most tender, I should say. Second most tender. Some of these recipes that Kelsey was doing, that flat iron steak would work really well for that also. One other question, what do you cook? She talked about the importance of a thermometer and using a thermometer. What temperature are you supposed to cook a burger to? Not quite. Who said 160? 160, okay. 160 degrees is actual medium doneness, so the burger is still nice and juicy, but any possible bacteria that may be present on the outside of that burger is destroyed. So always use a meat thermometer, no matter what, for food safety reasons and for those steaks and roasts. That's the most important way to get that perfectly cooked steak or roast. So anyway, so I owe you a gift and I owe you a gift, okay? Any other questions for Kelsey?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
What part is the con cut from?
The what cut?
On a roast that you have that's all.
Isn't, that's like the Brazilian style steak. Isn't that like close to the skirt steak? I think it's close to like the skirt steak. Good question.
Yeah, go ahead. You want to make a burger? Ooh, yeah, like when you just make a hamburger on the grill? Oh, like a loose meat sandwich. I really prefer a sloppy joe. That has my mom always made it with the ketchup and brown sugar and mustard. I love that, so that's what we always make at home. If I'm gonna do like a Maid-Rite, just a loose meat sandwich, probably keep it simple, like salt, pepper, garlic, onion. That's probably what I would put on mine. Yep. Any other questions? What was your favorite one? Okay, raise your hand if your favorite was the meatloaf. Okay. Raise your hand if your favorite was the beef and broccoli. Oh, lots of people. What about the fajitas? Wow, that's like A third. Oh, well, perfect. We are going to be back here on Tuesday, and we're going to be talking about how to make a perfect prime rib. So if you like prime rib, there's going to be samples. I just practiced last week. It's good. It's going to be good. Yeah, so any other questions? Rochelle, anything else from you?
I got one last question. A 3-ounce serving of beef gives you 25 grams of protein. That's half of your protein needs for the day. What does 3-ounce serving size of beef look like? Who said it?
Yes, deck of cards.
Deck of cards. Yeah, 3 ounces. Okay, 25 grams of protein. And all beef, whether it's lean or non-beef, 170 calories. So we call this nutrient rich. You get a lot of nutrients for very few calories. So anyway, I don't know who to give this deck of cards to, so I'll lay it over there on the table, and the first one that gets the table can get it. Thank you for coming. I appreciate you coming.
Thank you very much.